Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome everybody to this tribute for Edyth Schoenrich. And we're all here because we know Edyth, but I can't see her. I'm behind the door. But I know she's over there, and she's over there with some special friends, and she has an FM mic and told me that if she wants to make comments during any of my comments, she will, okay? I've said this before, and it's true for many of us in the room, but when we came to the school, Edyth was one of the first persons that we met. And when I was an MPH student in the precursor of this hall for orientation, DA was traveling. Now, as dean, I never traveled, DA, but you were traveling. And Edyth did the orientation. And I still remember that day and her talking about the history of the school, the importance of public health, and the accomplishments of the dean, D.A. Henderson. And I, over the course of that MPH year, found her to be an incredible person who was supportive and wise and caring, and she's been that way. She was that way before I met her, and she's been that way every day. So I want to give a special thanks. Some people have come a long way, and I'm not sure, Scott, whether we could move this podium. Maybe we can move it now so that when people come up to talk, they can, or move the portrait. Yeah, maybe move the portrait back so we can see. Well, so we only need one thing. So here he's moving that. That's good. Okay, good. So that's good. So we can get to see Edyth there. Edyth can make hand gestures to me during the course of the. But we want to especially thank her family and friends who have traveled here, and Lola, her daughter. Lola, thank you. Olaf and his partner Marilyn Macy. Olaf and Marilyn, thank you for coming. Arturo Steele, her nephew. Arturo, thank you. And her brother Ed and his wife Janet, thank you for coming. And their daughter Sharon. And where's Sharon? Sharon? Later, she'll come for dinner. Okay, good. So we have a relatively short program, I think, but it's going to be people getting up to talk about Edyth and tell us anecdotes and what she has meant to them. And we're going to have some video presentations interspersed. So the first person I'd like to ask up is Jim Yeager, who's the Senior Associate Dean for Academic Affairs, but also the Edyth H. Schoenrich Professor in Preventive Medicine. Jim?
Thank you. Welcome, everyone, on this wonderful occasion. So I want to begin by saying what an honor it is for me to be here at this celebration, and in particular because of being the current Edyth H. Schoenrich Professor in Preventive Medicine, especially at this time. Bob Lawrence was the first faculty member to hold this chair. And second, to be really following in Edyth's footsteps as the Senior Associate Dean for Academic Affairs in the school. So I came to the school in 1989, and our backgrounds are very different. So Edyth's a physician trained in experience in internal medicine, preventive medicine, public health administration, academic administration, and the training and education of public health practitioners. And I'm a laboratory scientist. I was trained in the area of cell and developmental biology, and then I evolved into a toxicologist. And so when I came here, I was trained in the area of academic administration and the education of research scientists. So we were very, very different. Our paths began to intersect, though, in 1991. Donna Strobino and I were co-coordinators of the 1991 strategic plan effort in the school. And I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear that Edyth had many ideas about the plan. And in particular, that aspect of the plan that was focused on education. Since that time, Edyth has become my role model and my mentor. She rarely calls me by name, but when she does, it usually goes something like this. James Yeager, and Al will appreciate this one, we need to find a way to provide our MPH program at one price for all our students. And many, many other examples of those kinds of final commands. Edyth, thank you for all you've done for the school and the hundreds and hundreds of agents of change that have received their education here and gone out into the world to make a difference. And thank you for being my mentor and keeping a gentle hand on my tiller as my role in the school's leadership has grown over the past 20 years now. Happy birthday, Edyth.
One of the truly remarkable things about Jim Yeager is the way he has grown up. From being a laboratory scientist to someone who really understands what public health is all about and what public health education means to everyone on this planet. And he has just been an extraordinary person here in the school in advocating for our educational programs as well as our research programs. Thank you, Jim, for being who you are.
So today is a 9 party, right? It's a 9 party. It's 9/9/09, and it's a 90th birthday. And so we couldn't pass this up, especially given that the current director of the MPH program is a biostatistician and likes numbers. So we think perhaps the best person to talk about Edyth Schoenrich is Edyth Schoenrich. And so we're going to show a video called Edyth on Standing Out. So could you roll that? Thanks.
Another little anecdote I'll tell, which may be of interest to you, is that I learned a lesson as one of only 3 women in my medical school class, that it's not always a disadvantage to stand out as someone who is different. One of the faculty members at the University of Chicago School of Medicine, who later won the Nobel Prize for his work, loved to catch the students with trick questions. I remember very clearly a session in which perhaps 15 of us were in a small room with this professor, and he put up on the X-ray viewing box an X-ray and asked a question. No one answered for a while, and all of a sudden it struck me what the right answer was. I raised my hand and gave it. Ever after, when some of the most distinguished professors passed me in the hall, they would say, "Oh, are you the one who answered Dr. So-and-so's trick question?" Now, if I had been one of the young men, they would never have remembered the individual. But being the only woman in that room and answering the question correctly helped them to remember and to take note. So if one performs well, sometimes there can be an advantage in standing out as different.
So Edyth, do you want to say anything before I go on?
I'm satisfied with what I said.
Good. So now something that will put fear in the heart of anybody being the subject of a festschrift like this is we're going to ask your brother, Edward Hull, to come up and say a few words.
As you'll probably know, any of you who might be the youngest in the family, that this is really something you grow up dreaming about. It's payback time. Cut her mic off, please. I should tell you a little bit about our family. There were 3 children, Edyth, then I had an older sister who was a year older than me, but I always referred to her as my youngest sister, and myself. And you'll have to excuse me for using a script, but when I was little, it took a long time for me to learn how to talk. And that was basically because I didn't have to. Every time somebody every time somebody would ask a question, of course I had Edyth and Marion, and there were my answers, you know. So eventually I learned that maybe it would be best if I learned how to speak. So I did finally raise that up. Now, we have, in all families, you spend time wondering about your children. What are they going to be when they grow up? What are they going to specialize in school? You always hope for the best, and you never know exactly what. And it usually happens, very rarely that it happens at a young age. However, Marion and I, my sister, my younger sister, she and I found out what Edyth was going to do in a very strange way, I might add. But we knew when we were very little what she was going to end up doing. And we found out one day when we came home from school, they told us, Marion and myself, not to go down in the pool room to play that afternoon. Now, my grandfather had a fairly large house. We lived with our grandparents off and on for a few years. And he had a beautiful paneled pool room with the pool table and the lights over the top. And so naturally, you tell a couple of kids not to go someplace, where are they going to go? You know, they go downstairs. So Marion and I went down there, and we found on the pool table, I hope you remember this because I do. This is not a made-up story. There were a couple of jars on the pool table we didn't know what was in it. And in the middle was a turkey roaster with a lid on it. We pulled the lid off, and that's all we had to do because we were out of there. That was a little more than we bargained for. And we were scared to death what we had seen because there inside was a cat, stone cold with the paws up and slit right down the middle. That was one thing that we didn't want to see. So we ran upstairs. Now, in the old days when we were born, as you well know, well, probably the mothers spent a long time in the hospital after birth, and then when they came home, they would usually hire a nursemaid to take care of the kids at home and also the new baby. So when I was born, they hired a wonderful lady. Her name was Cora. She was supposed to be with us for 2 weeks, and she stayed 21 years. So she was kind of a nursemaid for the three of us, and just a wonderful lady. But I found out the truth, that my mother was very, very smart, because she really hired her as a bodyguard for me against my sisters. So when Marion and I got upstairs, we weren't sure what to do. We couldn't talk to our mother, we couldn't talk to our grandmother because they were the ones that told us not to go down there. So as far as we were concerned, other than my mother and my grandmother, the fountain of all knowledge came from Cora, my bodyguard. So we asked her and told her what we had seen and what should we do about it. Because the last thing we wanted to do was end up on the pool table. So we didn't know whether she had cracked or not, you know. So anyway, she said, Cora was very smart. She said, no, you don't have to worry. Number one, it isn't your cat. And number two, she's training to be a veterinarian. So, as you can see, she didn't quite make that. And I know the cat world was very happy about that. Now, I have my lovely wife with me of 58 years. It's a little emotional, but we have 5 wonderful kids and 18 grandchildren. And adding it up on a computer, on a calculator, which I did, It's 29 people who say, "Happy birthday, Edyth." Thank you.
Eddie, I feel paid back.
Yeah. So I sense a new sign on your door, Edyth, Dead Cat, Schoenrich. So our next speaker is Al Sommer, and Edyth has served the school for many years and served many deans. And when Al became the dean, Edyth was the dean for academic affairs. So Al?
Well, the first thing is I didn't know there was this parry and thrust deal going on here, so I'm going to change my talk. Because I know I can't keep up with Edyth. So the problem one is faced with when you're discussing Edyth is where to begin. The only connection that I had with Edyth before I was dean was when I was still across the street at the medical school, and she asked me to give a lecture in one of her courses, which I was very happy to do, and that's when I discovered that she was both very proscriptive and very encouraging. My first real interaction began in 1990 when I became the dean. DA left me no one to serve as the associate dean. The person who had decamped to be provost in Florida, so I had no idea how things ran or what to do. So I gave Edyth no choice. She had served DA as associate dean. She had to serve yet again. She felt no compunction telling me that she agreed that I did need help and that I didn't know what I was doing. All of which was true. Until one day, I apparently did know what I was doing, and she told me that as well. Edyth is, of course, the ultimate gadfly. Nothing escapes her interest or attention. Not administrative decisions, not curricula changes, not the need to do things we weren't doing. And she could prove all this because it appears that the entire archives of this school, if not the university, resides in her garden shed. And she would occasionally exhume these onion paper minutes and things for my edification. Typically, she took on what was then our part-time education program like it was the very soul of the school, which in many ways it was, driving out to Montgomery County more often each week than every other faculty member, I think, combined. She approached our then newfangled, and it was very newfangled at the time, web education the same way. Her Hot Topics course is still the go-to and a way to ensnare potential new students into the excitement of public health. In fact, people travel from New York and beyond just for the opportunity to give a lecture in her Hot Topics course. She is our mother hen, even if she waves her cane menacingly at me whenever I say that. This actually echoes something we've all experienced, and Jim has already alluded to. On a good day, I would hear, "Dean Sommer, you have not been doing enough," and you can fill in whatever the issue du jour was. On a bad day, it was, "Al Sommer, I need to take you to task." What Edyth has always cared most about, of course, are students and what we do for them. She is certainly happiest when she's mentoring students, but is not reluctant nor shy to mentor faculty, deans, provosts, or university and hospital presidents, even when they've not asked for mentoring. I do have another meeting I'm supposed to be at right now, and I explained to those people that I would be a few minutes late because of this celebratory event for Edyth's 90th birthday. They immediately asked, "Wow, what's her secret?" I replied, spending lots of time engaging young students. But then I also had to add, of course, she also spends lots of time ballooning over the Alps during the winter. So I've concluded that Edyth's secrets are: start with good genes and remain thoroughly engaged, keep that brain working, and constantly challenge others to challenge you. As this event will clearly show, deans and dean emeriti come and go, but Edyth Schoenrich soldiers on. Mother hen, we love you and cherish all that you do for us personally, for the school, and for the university that you so ably serve. Happy birthday.
Thank you, Al. Thank you. And because you asked so politely, when the time comes, you can leave.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Al. You're just great.
I escaped with that.
Oh, thank you.
So our next speaker is somebody who's had a long affiliation with Hopkins. He went to medical school here. He's a colleague and friend of Edyth's for at least 50 years. He's a trustee emeritus of Hopkins. He is a general internist who was the dean of general internal medicine in New York. He was emeritus professor of clinical medicine at Cornell University Medical College. And then he went and revitalized the New York Academy of Medicine. So I'd like to welcome Jeremiah Barandes, a friend and colleague, to the podium.
Thank you very much, Mike. I'm enormously pleased. Forgive my voice, I hope you will. That's a case of reflux laryngitis. See, 3 o'clock, you've already seen a case of something. I really am enormously pleased and flattered to be invited to this celebration and to offer a few words of comment about my dear friend, Edyth. The invitation said we'd be celebrating her 90th birthday, which I understand is today, actually. And I would offer the suggestion that the number of years one has lived is a rather weak and ambiguous marker of age. Everyone, I'd suggest further, at least everyone of adult years, is 3 ages simultaneously. There is, of course, chronological age. In Edyth's case, that's 90, but it doesn't tell you very much. More importantly, there's functional age. I won't presume to be specific as to her functional age. I will hazard the estimate that it's some decades younger than 90, probably somewhere in her 50s, maybe at a stretch in her early 60s. And finally, there's the all-important psychological or psychosocial age, a term that embraces the persistence of curiosity, of psychological and social energy, of interests and enthusiasms and openness to new experiences. I would put Edyth's psychological age at around 22. It's, of course, the latter two, functional and psychological age, that really define how old we are, that determine the range and quality of life as the years pass, the physical and social erosions that come with chronologic age permitting. Notice also that while chronological age proceeds at a rate we can easily measure, functional and psychological aging advance in a slower, more complex and interrelated fashion. They're really where the rubber hits the road, and I take all this to mean that it's permissible to wish you, Edyth, 3 happy birthdays simultaneously, and I take today's celebration to refer to all 3 as well. Now, I met Edyth in 1948 when she was an intern on the Osler Medical Service, and I was a really callow 4th-year student. And although our paths have diverged, both geographically and professionally, and although our contacts have been widely spaced, in some real sense, I felt that we were kindred creatures, and I have felt her to be a close friend over all those years. From the beginning, she struck me as a blithe spirit, warm, sensible, with a perpetual smile and a kind of eager openness to others and to the world, and well-disposed. I have never heard her say a mean thing. Now, in the invitation to be here today, it was suggested, that I should focus on personal stories. So I will not mention her academic honors, which I'm sure others will, nor will I mention the chair established here in her name, and I also won't mention her various and important functional roles with the NIH, the Institute of Medicine, the Department of Health and Human Services, the American Board of Preventive Medicine, the American Hospital Association, or others. I will, however, reflect on two particular expressions of the range of her enthusiasms that have struck me as characteristic, even paradigmatic, of this remarkable person. The first is her devotion to the opera, a passion I happen to share. Describing her relation to opera, and in particular to the Metropolitan Opera in New York, and saying that she likes it, is something like describing Old Faithful as a water leak. For years, she has maintained a subscription at the Met, has several times each season made the trip by train to New York and to the Opera House, and has become in some degree a recognizable regular there. 2 or 3 years ago, I ran into Edie at the Medical and Surgical Association biennial here, and we had a chance to have a little catch-up talk. And she told me something about her relationship to the Met, and how much pleasure it gave her, and with what joy she made these recurring trips to New York. At one point, she confided she had made a gift to the opera as an expression of thanks for all the pleasure she had had there. It must have been a really heartfelt gift, because as a result, she was asked whether there was anyone special or anything in particular she'd like to know better or sit down with. What they had in mind, I'm sure, was the usual kind of thing they do for donors. For example, meet Maestro Levine, talk to the first violinist, chat with the bassoonist, or with the percussionist on the glockenspiel if you're interested in the glockenspiel, or perhaps one of their special gifts, talk with or have dinner with some of the cast members of the various Met productions. Or yet further, maybe even carry a spear in the triumphal scene in Aida. Or maybe be a wanton gypsy in Carmen. I wish you had done that. Or really dress up and go to a ball in Traviata. Not this lady. Edie's idea of further thrills at the opera was finding out how the thing works, and that's what she did. She indicated her great interest was in meeting the stage crew and learning how they work their magic, how on that immense stage they can switch things around in 10 minutes so that we go from the cathedral scene in Act 1 of Tosca to Scarpia's infamous study to the castle battlements where the final arias are sung. Or how do they switch from the enormous ballroom scene in Act 1 of Traviata to the final wrenching sick room where Violetta dies of tuberculosis. And in the process, transport us. How do they do that? Take us right along with the people on the stage. It's an incredible thing, and I'm not surprised she wanted to know more about it. So she met the stage crew. I'm quite certain she charmed them at a level with which they were not familiar and gave them a dose of her infectious enthusiasm. She was shown around backstage, introduced, I'm sure, to various technical control panels and mechanical wonders, maybe even allowed to push a button or two and have something happen with one of the scrims. And that was very exciting. And then she was asked if there was anything else she especially wanted to see. And she said she thought a visit to the flies, to the catwalks, 4 or 5 stories above the stage, would be interesting. So up she went, carrying her cane along, clambered around like some benign, happy phantom of the opera in a locus where vertigo is endemic and footing is treacherous. And as she told me about it months later, she was still excited, hardly able to express the pleasure she had, her face all aglow and her eyes wide. Wow, I don't want to go up in the flies and on the catwalk, and I'm really surprised at you. Not really, Edie. I mean, it's perfectly in character.
The catwalk was 9 stories.
9 stories. That tells you I haven't been up there. Well, this was about 3 years ago, I guess. I marveled at the story, at the verve and inventiveness of the request, and as we continued to chat, I asked what she was going to do in the following months. This was in June. She said she was going to go ballooning in the Alps again, as she had on prior occasions. I don't know how many. Now, I don't know anybody else who's been up in a balloon, and I doubt I know anybody who's even contemplated such a thing. I have no real idea why people do it, or perhaps more importantly, having done it, why they do it again. So, thinking about that, and today, and about Edie, I tried to look into this a little bit. I was interested to learn that ballooning began in late 18th century France in the hands of a few young adventurers as a recreational pursuit. The first ascent in a hydrogen balloon was carried out, in fact, by another doctor, Alexandre Charles, in 1783 in Paris. He said later, I imagine speaking not only for himself but in advance for Edie and for others, he said, nothing will ever quite equal that moment of total hilarity. At the moment of takeoff, it was not mere delight, it was a sort of physical ecstasy. I could hear myself living, he said. An astounding and remarkable observation. I could hear myself living. And he added, never has a man felt so solitary, so sublime, so utterly terrified. I don't doubt you would ratify most of that description, except maybe the terrified part. It's hard to envision that in your case. It was of some additional interest to me to learn that Dr. Charles' ascent in 1783 was watched through a telescope by Benjamin Franklin, who was then American ambassador in Paris. People watching with him saw the recreational possibilities in this adventure, but Franklin saw beyond them. He was asked by someone, as has been asked in relation to many technologic and scientific advances, of what use is it? And Franklin is said to have answered, of what use is a baby? The remark doesn't relate maybe in any immediate sense to Edie's ballooning, but it does relate to central aspects of her character, namely openness to innovation and a sense of the importance of trying to imagine the application and pursuit of advances, technical or intellectual or social. And sure enough, 200 years later, disease mapping and geographical factors have emerged as feasible and useful tools in public health. In addition, both of these adventures, the trip to the flies 9 stories up in the Opera House and the ballooning over the Alps, not only tell us that our friend Edie is intrepid and likes high places, but that she has what amounts to the reverse of acrophobia. I was going to suggest, in fact, that she has acrophilia, until I Googled the word for the technical definition and discovered it's generally taken to mean something more than a penchant for heights. I will not divert into that definition, but I do suggest that at a minimum, people given to seeking heights, Edie included, like a vista. They like to see the world at scale. They like to see the big picture. And I imagine in her case, and at some level, it has harmonics with her move from the fine resolution involved in the clinical care of sick individuals to considerations, to the wider and more encompassing considerations of population health. It's all of a piece, it seems to me. Recent studies of centenarians have suggested that people who live to be 100 years old tend to have a positive outlook on life and positive and relatively benign expectations of the world. Edie clearly qualifies, even though she's only 90. In another study of nonagenarian nuns, in fact, this view was supported. A review of essays written 70 or 75 years earlier, when these nuns were postulants, also suggested that a positive outlook early in life seemed to be correlated in some way, not only with advanced age, but with continued intellectual vigor. Whatever it is, whatever it was, whatever the convergence of factors was that produced this remarkable woman, we can all be grateful for the outcome, for her friendship, for her love, and for her presence among us. I certainly am. I'll add just one note of congratulation, this one to Dr. Henderson. DA has done two great things in his life. The first was he brought Edie across the street to the School of Hygiene. I hope it's all right to call it the School of Hygiene, just among friends. And the second was he eradicated smallpox. I think I have them in the right order. Al Sommer, of course, perceived the wisdom of DA's recruiting decision, and Mike Clegg has done so too. What a happy thing for this place to have her here, to have her particular kind of yeast added to the institutional mix. And what a joy for all of us who love her. Happy triple birthday, Edie.
So we're going to hear from you again, Edyth, in a little video we call Edyth on Fixing the System.
Later, when my children began to arrive and I wanted to spend more time with them, I moved to the ambulatory or outpatient clinics in the hospital, which was a different type of lifestyle from the 24 hours a day, 7-day a week on-call type of work that I had been involved in inpatient care. And at that time, I began to realize something that no one had ever taught me in medical school, and no one had ever really clarified in my house officership period and in my postdoctoral period, namely that patients who came to the outpatient clinic had had their problems creeping up on them for years before I saw them, and that they were going to continue to suffer from the consequences of those disease processes for the rest of their lives, whether they lived another 2 days or another 20 years. And I became aware of the discontinuity of the care system and how people were discharged after long hospital stays and complicated hospital stays, discharged to situations in which it was going to be impossible for them to maintain their health, to get their medicines on time when they ran out, and so on. And I began to realize there's something wrong with this system. Not something just wrong with the way an individual patient or a person lives his life, but rather with the whole system. And so this began to lead me more and more toward work that would allow me to intervene at more than a single patient care situation.
Incredibly trenchant comments. We could have you before Congress tomorrow, right? As they think about trying to fix what's wrong. You know, we've heard that Edyth has had a long association with the school and a huge impact on students and the leaders and the deans of the school. And one of the reasons for that is because her house used to be where the dean's office is. So my desk is in Edyth's living room. And a person who's known her since those days and has been a close friend and generous donor to our school is Shirley Griffin. Shirley, I wonder if you could come up and say a few things.
It was the Griffins who arranged my very first balloon flight.
I arranged it, did you say?
in Connecticut.
This is aside from my remarks that I'd carefully written so I wouldn't offend you in any way, but, and I will digress because that was, I don't know how many years ago, but Edyth was hobbling around then, and I said to her, why don't you get that fixed? You know, like so many physicians, she didn't have time for herself. And she said, well, I can manage with this cane or walker, whatever she had. Gee, the only reason I'd fix it would be to go on to go ballooning. And I said, well, that's what you should do if you want to go ballooning. And she said, would you go? And in order to persuade her, I said, sure, I'll go. And boy, that's the last thing I ever wanted to do. And it was about a month later, she announced she was going to have the surgery to get the hip fixed. I said, she said, so we can go ballooning, And I was in the Alps in January on a balloon, and while she was the intrepid flyer, I hated the whole idea. And we were in this little town where Edyth goes back all the time now, and happily, we flew to Geneva, got to, what town were we in?
Stad.
Stad, yes, Stad. And the snow came down the day after we arrived, and the winds came up, and Buddy Bombard, our balloon master, said, well, we can't go today, but we're keeping careful watch. This went on for 8 days. I never had to fly. It snowed every day, and the entire group was so upset that they couldn't get out. And then they found that the last day that I was down in the church in Stad praying every day, it kept snowing. And I have to tell you, I didn't even know what kind of church it was. Well, the flyer, and actually I did this twice because, now I digress too much. As Bill said, get to the point. At the end of this experience of 8 days, which was really glorious in lots of ways of buzzing around Switzerland, in a van, we had lots of fun. Buddy Bombard was so upset, he said, this has never happened to me in all my years of taking flying trips. And he didn't know about the church down in the valley. And he said, and as an apology to all of you, I offer you a chance to come back again at half price. And that was the lure. And I was in Salzburg in the summer now, flying again. And I didn't like it. But anyway, it's continued. Now, well, it has been said that the heart that loves is always young. Well, all I have to do is look at this audience and know how many people Edyth has loved. And that accounts, I think, for her sweet endurance. And it's hard to believe that Edyth and I have known one another 62 years. We've never been particularly interested in chronological age, especially now. And that we're here celebrating her 90th birthday. Edyth and I first met when in 1949 I had a summer job as a clerk typist. That's loosely explaining it, because boy, I was a terrible typist. I had a summer job with her husband Carlos at Wolfe and McElderry Streets, and today when we were in there, before we came to this room, someone pointed out that we were in the very room where I used to try to type, and it's all gone. So Edyth would pop in every now and then from across the street, but I didn't know from where she was coming. And I assumed she was there to help me move chairs and lamps and dust the furniture and set up the office. And she didn't say anything. Of course she did that. I said, you bring that lamp over here and put those packing crates against the wall, which she did. And she did this, of course, uncomplainingly and smilingly in what I call her nice Edyth way. And she has continued to help me over the years and to be a wonderful friend in other crises in my life. Meeting ambulances in the middle of the night and medical airplanes at BWI in a mini hurricane. Always serene and always efficient and always caring and always with a reassuring smile. And also, I still remember her getting on an airplane at BWI. We had an airplane bring me in from St. Croix. And she had that sweet smile, and she came in with the whole ambulance crew telling them how to handle me, because I happened at that point to have a broken back. She had no idea that for 3 days I was being pulled around in St. Croix that I don't know how I ever made it, but she would tell the ambulance people how to handle, how to lift, and so on. And this wonderful expression of Edyth's, you've all heard her say, you know, with that smile and that serenity, and she would say, "Oh, Shirley," as if I had just dumped milk on my shoes, but I had more than that going on. Besides, you know, everybody knows she's very smart and intellectually curious, and she's always been able to separate quickly the unimportant stuff of life from that which is important. And what is important? Well, hot air ballooning. For there I'm reminded of a terrific essay by Robert Fulham, who wrote All I Really Need to Know, I think, as I Learned in Kindergarten. In a recent essay of Fulham's, which for some reason just rang a chord for me with Edyth, dancing all the dances as long as I can. And he announced to his friends when he was 78 years old that he was going to learn the tango. And not just any dance, but the tango. And that's a difficult and complex dance. Why the tango? Because he said that with aging, he feared the boredom that comes from not learning, not taking chances, not experiencing anything new. And I think that like Fulham, Edyth likes to experience something new. And like Fulham, she, quote, seeks the sharp, scary pleasure that comes from trying something new. So when friends asked the 78-year-old Fulham, "Why the tango at your age? Have you lost your mind?" And he answered, "No, and I don't intend to." And so I believe Edyth will continue to meet challenges and continue to feed her curiosity, reaching out as she has always done her whole life to make things better. And as long as Edyth can climb into that wicker balloon basket, she will soar aloft and examine this intriguing world from a brand new angle.
Well, Edyth seems to have really articulate friends. So our next speaker is somebody who really needs no introduction to everybody in this room, and we've heard a lot about him already. He's one of the emeritus deans, and that's D.A. Henderson. So, D.A.?
Well, this is a marvelous event, and I must say, the only thing I could think of is that somehow or other somebody has the math wrong. And I will come back to that in a little bit. I first met Edie in the summer of 1976, 33 years ago. The occasion was a meeting of the Dean's Search Committee at the school, and I'd been asked to meet with the committee to explain why I wasn't interested in being dean of the school. Here was a vigorous, chipper, attractive young person whom I thought was maybe in her 40s, and who seemed to have a very quirky ability to identify some of the most difficult questions that one had to ask. And it seemed to me, in fact, by the time we'd finished all the discussions, that she was the obvious one to be the new dean, certainly not me. And that the committee was really overlooking, as search committees usually do, anybody who's in the immediate vicinity, only to look further afield. At the time we met, I was still based in Geneva and was finishing up the smallpox program. In fact, we were getting to our last outbreaks of smallpox. And I was at that point of being the expert in smallpox, but having no cases of it. And leaves you in a sort of difficult position, knowing what do you do next. And then I got a call from Harry Wolf, who was the provost, who asked if I would be interested in coming to Hopkins to interview. And I said, really, I wasn't. I really knew nothing about deaning, and that I really had never thought about it. And I declined. but I said, if I happen to be in the U.S. at some point, I will happily give you a call. Well, then I had a telephone call from the embassy, and they said, could I come to Washington to have the ambassador of Ethiopia receive $2 million as a contribution, and it would be a sort of press event. So for $2 million, yes, I was immediately ready to come. And so I gave a call and came. And thus I came to explain really why I really wasn't thinking of being a dean. Now, on the committee, in addition to Edyth, was the legendary Abe Lilienfeld, who was an international figure in epidemiology. And Abe was like a little bulldog. When he got his teeth into a leg, he never let go. But I knew Abe well enough to be able to escape. But then Edyth was a different story. And she came across as an eloquent, dispassionately objective, understanding committee member. But somehow or other, by the time we'd finished the discussions, in a mysterious manner, she gradually brought around the discussion to the point of my trying to persuade the committee why I should be dean, which was totally opposite from when I went in. So you can imagine, I saw those skills in Edyth again and again as we went at it year after year, when so many people walk in thinking they're going a different direction and they walk out convinced that they've come up with a brand new idea, which, yes, I'd had some advance notice it was already in place. But there's another interesting chapter, and that was when I came to Hopkins, and never having been on a faculty before, have only a vague idea of what deans did. In fact, I'm not sure I know today very well what all deans do. And at that time, there was no associate dean. So I needed to recruit someone who knew something about the school and what my responsibilities might be. I hoped to have somebody who had medical experience and in public health. And it seemed to me we needed somebody who'd actually served in the field, because I really felt we needed in the school to move much more into the community and the practice of public health. And at the same time, we had what was called the chasm of Wolf Street between the medical school and the public school of public health, and somehow or other we needed bridges built there. So after a good 4 months of weighing options, I finally, talking with faculty and so forth, I realized that the person who really fit the bill was Edyth Schoenrich. She was highly respected in the faculty. She had experience in public health. She had with the Maryland Health Department. She was a physician. And she had been the first chief resident in medicine at Hopkins, which I thought was really quite remarkable. And more than that, as a fellow resident, was a man by the name of Dr. Richard Ross, who was with us today, who was dean of the medical school. And if ever we needed a bridge to the School of Medicine, this was a very helpful bridge. There were many who complimented me at the time in having appointed a woman to the position, and in so doing, fostering the cause for gender equity. And I take all credit for whatever, whatever value that appointment had. And I haven't confessed that it actually hadn't crossed my mind. She was simply, far and away, the very best candidate. And only afterwards did I realize that this was something unusual. More than that, it turned out that this was the first woman to be appointed to a dean's position in the whole of Johns Hopkins University. So indeed, Edyth has been known to break a few glass ceilings in her day, and very well deserved. Now, during the 14 years that we were served together and running the dean's office, and certainly all credit goes to Edyth and all that she did, I thought that with her attributes, personal and intellectual, that here was somebody who should be a dean's. should be perhaps a vice president, a provost, president of a university. And so I nominated her again and again for position after position, and she refused to even be interviewed. She was totally loyal and wanted to stay at Hopkins and at hygiene, and as we then referred to the school. So as I think Jerry Barondess had it quite right, I felt like in my career I've done two things that were exemplary, but far and away the best was recruiting Edyth Schoenrich. So after 36 years, I still think back to the first interview. She was, I thought, about 40 years of age. I'm maybe not a very good judge of age, but I thought she seemed like a very young person. And so I think after 36 years, I still think of her maybe as being in her mid-70s. I'm simply not prepared to think of her being 90 because she's got a number of years to go before she's going to reach that point. So Edyth, I must say, for 14 years of my best years of a career, I thank you, and I wish you a happy birthday. Thank you.
DA, those 14 years were some of my best years also.
So one more video. Edyth, honor students.
When I was academic dean, I pointed out what I knew to be true, that they were there for different reasons. I mean, some of them came to us because they had to, in order to get the next promotion. They had to earn a Master of Public Health degree. Some of them came because they really wanted to save the world and had that kind of special fire inside them. And some of them came because they couldn't stand going back to their previous jobs, didn't want to work there for another day. And some of them came because they really didn't know quite what they wanted to do with their energy and their personal gifts. I always enjoyed telling them that we could provide them with a lot of facts, but that facts change all the time. Science is constantly unfolding. We all know that, constantly unfolding. So that we had to provide them with basic principles and basic methodologies that they could use then with different content, different facts. We had to also try to free up or to kindle the capability of making very tough decisions, having the guts to make very tough decisions, even without all the refined data that we talk about here in the school that are not available to people in real life settings. And I do hope that we provide them that, because that's what makes the difference between a caretaker and a leader. Yeah.
Yeah, she's there. So now, Edyth, we have a gift. And this gift is not from us, okay? And you can't look at it yet. This gift is from James Morris, okay? Yes. So James Morris, we've heard about Edyth's passions, or passion for the school, for public health, for students, for ballooning, and for opera. So James Morris is from Baltimore, and he earned a music scholarship to attend the University of Maryland, and then went to Peabody Conservatory. He won Grammy Awards for Best Opera Recording in both 1990 and 1991. And Edyth was able to see Mr. Morris perform in Richard Wagner's The Ring Cycle. So you know the plot of this story revolves around a magic ring that grants power to rule the world. Uh-oh. So, oh boy, I lost my script. So on this, you're going to have to read it, I guess. So this is a photograph of Mr. Morris singing in the Wagnerian opera, and there's an inscription on it, which let me see if I can find it. Yeah, here it is. I got it. Okay, so you can show it to her, and the inscription is, Dr. Schoenrich, may your magic ring give you the power to continue to save millions of lives at a time. Sincerely, James Morris. So following up on your passion for opera, we're very pleased and honored to have with us Jennifer Holbrook, who's going to sing for us. Her accompanist, Song Yi Park, and they will perform one of your favorite operas, so I'm told, La Traviata, the Act 1 area.
Yes, what an honor it is to be here today and to be able to sing for you, Edyth. And I'm sure that you know the opera better than I do. But for those of you who aren't so familiar with La Traviata, I will be singing the role of Violetta, who is a Parisian courtesan who is dying of tuberculosis. She could have really used you, I think. And she falls in love at a party of hers with a man named Alfredo. And he begs to be able to come see her the next day, and she finally relents. And to seal the promise, he gives her a camellia. And so she is left to ponder her thoughts of whether his love is worth giving up her fame, fortune, and ultimately her freedom.
Thank you. That was great. It was great. I mean, it's just, it's hard to believe a human being can make music that beautiful, but it was great. So, I walked past the MPH office today, and there was a little sign on the door that somebody had put up there that said, Happy Edyth Schoenrich Day, right? That's what it said. So Governor O'Malley saw that sign and has made it official. And Jim, could I ask for your help again? So Jim is carrying over to Edyth a proclamation from Governor O'Malley from the state of Maryland, and I'm going to read it to you. It says, whereas Dr. Edyth Schoenrich has served as a preventive medicine physician, public health practitioner, professor, and associate dean for more than 60 years. She has been a major force in advancement of professional involvement in prevention and public health at the Johns Hopkins Medical Institutions, including the Bloomberg School of Public Health and throughout the world. And whereas Dr. Edyth Schoenrich has had a tremendous impact on public health professionals around the globe who have studied or been advised by her during this time. During her distinguished career, Dr. Schoenrich has advised 5 deans at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. And whereas the state of Maryland recognized Dr. Edyth Schoenrich as an outstanding female role model and exemplary professional by inducting her into the Maryland Women's Hall of Fame in 2005. Whereas Marylanders salute the tremendous contribution of Dr. Edyth Schoenrich to the medical and public health community and commend her outstanding and long-standing commitment to the pursuit of public health and prevention, as well as the education of public health professionals. Now, therefore, I, Martin O'Malley, Governor of the State of Maryland, do hereby proclaim September 9, 2009, as a special day of tribute to Dr. Edyth Schoenrich Day in honor of Dr. Schoenrich's extraordinary commitment to the promotion of public health and in celebration of her 90th birthday. I do commend this observance to all of our citizens. So we're not quite done. And I'd like to ask the artist, Mr. Cedric Egley, and his wife, Joan Nate, to come and join me at the podium, please. And Cedric, would you care to say a few words?
Well, all I can say is this is really one of the most warming and loving birthday parties I've ever been to. And I don't know how I could add anything to this. If I knew all this about her, I don't know if I could paint her the portrait. I was called by Ricky Fine to paint a portrait of an older woman at Johns Hopkins. And last year I painted George Comstock, and I was thinking, oh, some old people, and John Hopkins. Johns Hopkins doesn't retire these these experienced brains. They just keep using them, and I think that's great. So we go to see her, and my wife and we talked to her, and she says, "How would I paint her?" Well, I only saw her one way. It was not too many. She was certainly one person, I worked on the portrait all summer from photographs. We took a lot of photographs of her, and I wasn't in the area. So just a few days ago, I started working on her portrait, and I noticed the love of the people around her, and her. All of a sudden, I realized there was a great gamut of expression in her face. I told her she should have been on the stage because you could read what she was like from real far away. It was way up her face, and then it was way down, thoughtful. It was a very, very large gamut. And then, so I was trying to see how I could express that in the portrait. And I think maybe I should work some more on it, I don't know. But anyway, my wife says not talk anymore. Anyway, one more thing. And a really touching thing to me as we thought, well, my wife started asking her, how long she'd been married and about her husband and everything. So she'd been married, I think, when she was 22 years old or 23, and this one little simple wedding ring, so you know their husband was not he must have been a student also, because that's the kind of ring I bought my wife. And I thought that was really touching. Here was a young woman here sitting in front of me, beautiful, that a lot of people must have really thought was desirable, and here she is still expressing, as an old person, very desirable qualities. That's all I can say.
I was just going to say a few words about you.
Sure. All right.
So I'll ask you to stand next to the portrait. Not yet, Edyth. No, you can't touch it. And so, as Mr. Egley said, we were fortunate to have him work with the school and paint George Comstock's portrait, which is in the boardroom. And we asked him to do that, and asked him again, because he's such an acclaimed artist and teacher. His portraits are in collections in the Pentagon, Duke and Brandeis Universities, Mount Sinai and Johns Hopkins Hospitals. He's an exceptional member of the American Portrait Society, and his work has been awarded the Grand Prize Medal Best of Show in the National Portrait Art Competition conducted by the National Portrait Seminar in New York. So I'm going to ask him, and can Edyth help to unveil the portrait? Okay. Okay. Yeah. She's the technical person, Mrs. Egley. Yeah.
There's something very seductive about having a captive audience. And I did have some remarks that I was going to provide, which I think would take a little more than the 5 minutes that I've been allocated. But I have to say thanks, of course. I have to say thanks to everyone, to all my colleagues over the years who've given so much intellectual excitement to my life, to the wonderful students who've come to us, who go out and do such wonderful things if we just don't ruin them while they're here. And I have to say thanks to the folks I work with every day in the MPH program, which is now led by Marie Diener West, a marvelous, marvelous director for the program, so sensitive to student needs and to her staff needs. And I have to thank the dean and all the speakers and Christina and Monique, who worked the magic to put this day together. But there are a couple of other people I'd like to notice as folks who have improved the quality of my life as I've grown older, just sort of hour by hour and day by day. And I did ask to have invited George Marks from our housekeeping department, who, when I see him in the loading dock as I come out from the garage always has some kind of inspirational words to say to me. And it's a wonderful thing to start a day's work having had those words from George. And I want to bring attention to Officer Valerie Finney, who I hope is here today. And she helps me every morning to go down the ramp into the loading dock so that I don't have to walk all around the building. And Officer Michael Murray, who watches on his surveillance TVs for when I'm starting out to go to my car to go home, and he's there to help me up the ramp. And then Mildred Faulkner, who works at the Wolf Street entrance and watches me as I make my expedition trips on a weekly basis toward Hampton House and makes sure that I get back safely across Wolf Street. And then finally, Captain Chuck Barbera. There's no one quite like him. Captain Barbera is one of a kind. He really knows human nature in its whole spectrum and has marvelous tales to tell about what it means to see human beings at their best and at their worst. And I really wish that if all 5 of you are here, you'd stand up for a minute so I can thank you. Those people and others like them on our staff do so much to make for the quality of life that we have here at this remarkable institution. Another thing I think I'll say, if you have a bit more patience, is that I don't think of myself as a freak. I have reached 90 years of age, yes. I don't know quite how it's happened. It went so fast. And yet, I'm not alone among faculty members who have reached that age. George Comstock, for example, who's sadly no longer with us, was over 90 when he died, and so was Anna Bacher. But among our faculty now, Carl Taylor, who for many years was the conscience of the school, until that role was partly taken over by Bob Lawrence, he is over 90. So is Roland Ryder. So are 2 nurses, Alice Gifford and Anna Scholl, who did so much to expand the kinds of roles that persons in their profession could do. Tom Simpson, who now is in a retirement community up in Philadelphia, is over 90 and was an expert in tropical diseases. And he told me that he was the first physician to examine John McCain when he was released from his prison. Margaret Bright is also over 90. Margaret, are you here? She did so much to bring social epidemiology to our Department of Epidemiology. And do I see Charles Flagel here? I thought I saw you come in. He recently had his 90th birthday. And I remember that when I worked more actively on the faculty, I thought he was one of the most brilliant persons on our faculty, not only because he was an expert in his own field of operations research and systems analysis, but because he also had what we call a Renaissance mind. He's always been interested in all the humanities, in arts and music, and political science, economics, and he's over 90 and functioning very well. So I don't consider myself a freak, and I don't consider the other folks I've mentioned as freaks either. I was going to say a little bit about myself, but we're overdue in time. So what's that? It's your birthday. My birthday? But I don't want the hot foods to get too cold or the cold foods to get too hot, so that none of us have a problem after this reception. But I had some decisions to make as I was thinking of what I wanted to do in life. And I know that as a child, my grandfather Kelly was a great influence on my intellectual development. And when I was in this phase, he used to read to me about people in other cultures and show me his books that he had about African cultures, about Asian cultures, about the various religions of the world, and so on. So very early, I was drawn to the fascination of knowing people in other cultures and how they handled the problems that life brings. And so I was drawn, actually academically, to cultural anthropology. But also, I was equally drawn, as my brother brought out, to trying to understand what life is. Life, that mysterious, almost magical process. What is it? And I thought that medicine would answer those questions for me. It didn't, but it showed what some of the questions are, and gave me the opportunity to meet people who were so actively involved in trying to answer those questions. So I was drawn both toward cultural anthropology and toward medicine, and chose medicine as a profession. But as time went on, I really learned that these two areas do overlap, as maybe I could explain to you. I've really led several lives, and that's true of many of us. For example, I've been a student in at least 3 universities, and it's a marvelous, marvelous thing to learn. And maybe one of the things that has kept me going is that I never stopped learning or wanting to learn. And I've tried to convey the joy of that to the students I've touched. Also, I have had a clinical period in my life. And I remember walking up the front steps into the main building of the hospital in June of 1948, when I was coming as an intern, and thinking, am I smart enough? Do I know enough to survive in a place like this? And then here I am, 61 years later. But the clinical period of my life, active clinical period, was so gratifying, because there is nothing that gives one quite such a charge, I think, as having a patient seize your hand and say, you saved my life, and you know you did because of the knowledge that you had and the decisions that you made. But I found that many of these phases in my life really overlapped. Certainly the lifelong learning has, but I also had a phase of doing clinical research, which overlapped with clinical care, as it does so often here at Hopkins. I think of research as a broad umbrella, a really broad umbrella, of any organized and structured search for new knowledge, no matter what the content is. And I think that organized, structured search for new knowledge is something that should have equal value regardless of the content. Laboratory versus clinical versus environmental versus community versus evaluation and so on. But I had a wonderful time working with Dave Grobe with myasthenia gravis patients, and working with Larry Schulman, who went on to be head of one of the major institutes at National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, when the adrenocortical trophic hormones first came on the scene in medicine. The postdoc period with Larry was one in which the two of us were known as the Gold Dust twins. We worked with Mac Harvey, the chair of medicine, and brought these magical medicines to the wards. But this was a time when there was no understanding of true clinical trials as we know them now, or the gold standard that we now use. Larry, are you here? I don't see him. But that was a wonderful period, and it overlapped, both with learning and with the clinical period. Then I gradually was eased into management. That was at City Hospital, now Bayview, when I worked with that charismatic, brilliant young man, Mason Lord. He was building systems of care. He was a marvelous clinician, worked with chronically ill and aging adults primarily, but he built systems of care, and with multiple levels and types of care available. And we followed very, very carefully over 2,000 patients using just 3 public health nurses as our contacts, and having backup in the hospital when it was needed. One of his philosophies was, keep your central staff small, but your influence broad. And he achieved that. And I learned so much from him, though he died at age 39, tragically, with a brain malignancy. At that time, I was beginning to understand what it meant to try and live the Chinese proverb that is hanging in the hall here between this auditorium and Finestone, and which hangs also in our MPH office. It is not the knowing that is difficult, but the doing. And the doing is not just a one-on-one thing. It is building and working within systems. Another phase then was moving directly into full management and policy. And this was in the Maryland State Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. What a culture shock it was to move from the world I had been in to a huge, huge bureaucracy. I knew I didn't have the tools. In 2 days, I knew I didn't have the tools to do my job, which was to be concerned and control the preventive services for all adults in Maryland and to manage the 5 state hospitals. So I came and got my MPH degree on a part-time basis and learned my analytic tools and learned something about management that told me Charlie, how to get around the barriers within a bureaucracy and get done what I wanted to get done. And during my MPH, there were at least 2 lectures that really blew my mind, just blew my mind. One was given by Wally Mandel on power. Polite word would be influence. But power, what is it? How do you get it? How do you hold it? How do you lose it? How do you use it? It was a fantastic lecture. And another was by Saul Levine, that giant in sociology. And he talked about how one can identify moments in any society, in any community, in any location, when change is going to be easier. What new resources, for example, an apathetic population, an outside enemy, how one maneuvers and manipulates in a positive way the situation in which you want to bring about change. Dr. Buchel took a chance, Arthur Buchel, when he was chair of the Department of Health Policy and Management, and hired me on the faculty here. And so I'm talking to you today. And it was another kind of cultural shift, moving from this huge bureaucracy and from the previous clinical setting to an academic institution. We are a bit weird in what we demand of the persons who share our lives in these very high-level academic institutions. But I learned more and more about policy making, about management, and as DA has often said, management and administration are not just paper pushing. One needs to be very, very creative in management, as he was worldwide in setting up the programs in eliminating smallpox. And I began then to be involved in what is leadership. And this is where I am now. What is leadership? How do we provide the skills to our students to be leaders and not just caretakers? And so there's been many phases in my life, as there have been in many of our faculty, but the transition has been smooth, has made sense, and there has been overlapping of these different periods. So, I hope we continue to strive not to ruin those remarkable men and women who come to us, and to encourage them to have the courage to do what they can as positive change agents to make this world a better place on this beautiful blue and green planet that we sail on. That's all, Mike, and thanks again. Okay, I hope I didn't take too long.
No, it's not.
Thank you all.
So please join us down the hall for refreshments and for a piece of Edyth's birthday cake. And for anybody who wasn't here, you might want to tell them that they can go to the link that's listed in your program, and this video of the event will be there. So Edyth, happy birthday.